Presence, the podcast for everyone interested in bodywork, embodiment, and somatic practices. I'm Andrew Rosenstock, your host and guide on this enlightening journey. With my expertise as a somatic movement therapist, yoga therapist, and certified Rolfer, I'll merge clinical insight with real-world experience to enrich our discussions with our guests. Through engaging and informative talks, this podcast delves into mind-body paradigms, offering insights and strategies to empower personal growth. Your support is vital for our grassroots and lo-fi production. If you connect with our content, please leave a positive review and subscribe on your preferred platform. Your engagement helps us reach a broader audience and supports our mission. So thanks for tuning in today to Touching into Presence. Fasten your seatbelt as we embark on a journey to explore the transformative power of contemplative and somatic practices together. It was a pleasure to be in conversation today with Dawn St. John. Dawn is a psychotherapist, Continnum fluid movement teacher, author of the award-winning Healing the Wounds of Childhood and the revised Healing the Wounds of Childhood and Culture. He has been immersed in the psychological, somatic, relational, and spiritual worlds for more than 50 years. Dr. St. John has a unique perspective on healing and human potential, having constructed a view that includes four essential and interrelated components: the somatic, body, the psycho-emotional, the relational, and the spiritual. Dawn and I had a lovely discussion where we shared our backgrounds, interests, and personal journeys. We spoke about an underutilization of resources that could benefit people, such as clinical treatments and philosophical and psychological concepts. We spoke about how Hellerwork began, Continnum, Hannah Somatics, the importance of Dr. Rolf's work, and ended with a little discussion about some of the usage of the trademark of Rolfing. I found our talks with Dawn to be really just enjoyable and informative and educational, and we hope you enjoy it as well. So, with that, here's Dawn.
Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Dawn. So, thanks for making time.
Been looking forward to this conversation, Andrew, given your background and training. So, it's eager to meet you.
Same. I heard great things from
Greer,
yeah. And was excited because I haven't had a Hellerwork practitioner on before to talk about it. And from what I gather, you were pretty much there from the beginning.
Right from the beginning, from the moment of conception.
And
through the birth.
Well, and unfortunately, Heller himself has recently passed, so having him on would be not possible at this point. The technology, I don't have that technology yet to reach that level.
That's that's a rather high level.
Yeah. But what I also gathered is you are, as we all are, but you are more than just a Hellerworker.
Yeah, I actually haven't been practicing Hellerwork for about 22 years now. And that's after it being my primary modality for over 20 years. So I guess that's another way of saying I'm getting old.
Well, I'm pretty sure we all are. I'm pretty sure that's the nature of life is getting older.
Beats the alternatives.
Yeah. With that, I don't really have plans per se for talks. I really let them be as natural and authentic as it can be. While we originally planned to talk about Hellerwork, and I'd love to maybe hear a bit about it, but I'm also okay if this hasn't been what you've been doing for a while. You may want to even share why you deviated from that, and all of that's fine with me. I don't know if you have a preference.
There are several things I'd like to talk about, but I liked how you phrased it, to just allow the conversation to flow organically. I like to follow your interests. I'm also a Continnum teacher. I was also trained with Tom Hanna. So there are a lot of things we can talk about. I mean, one of the things that interests me, Andrew, is you and I both know that there are so many resources available for human beings to live a life with more grace, more ease, more fluidity, more connection. And yet, the overwhelming majority of people in this country don't know about any of them. And, that's something that concerns me. I'd love to see more and more people. And it's one of the reasons I do these podcasts. I think I've done about 50 or 60 in the last year. And it's one of the reasons I do it, because I'm aware of how much support is available that people don't know about.
Yeah.
In particular, because, I started a mess. If you want to get into trauma, my first 15, 17 years on this planet were one long series of traumas, which I, then acted out through my 20s. And it wasn't until my 30s that I began to change that trajectory. And it was headed clearly to an early death. And at 81, I'm still alive. I'm teaching Continnum, which is, teaching fluid movement, and been in a marriage that's still thriving 40 years later, after 3 divorces. So I came via the low road. And, I thank God for people like Dr Rolf and Emily Conrad and Tom Hanna and Joe Heller. And so that all to say, whatever you're interested in talking about.
Well, it's for me, it is a fluid dance, to use a bit of Emily's phrasing. And it's always challenging because I get feedback from some people, who say, I didn't appreciate that episode because of blah, blah, blah. And then other people who will say, I really appreciate that episode because of blah, 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 being the same, the same thing. And so what I'm always trying to do is figure out my own fluidity of, I find that some of these talks are really more about, what I'm hearing you speak into, which is more about being in a conversation of sorts around this theme. And other talks, which we could have as well, and maybe it will be that, is around Dawn and the practices. And not that they can't be both, but finding that sweet spot between what is. And then there's this other aspect, which is, there's the sweet spot for me and Dawn right now, but is that sweet spot what is ultimately supportive for other people listening? And I don't have that answer, but my sense is, already we're just meeting and we're in this sort of flow that we will dip and dive. And for those who do not enjoy the ones where I might be more involved, they might want to tune out right now. Maybe not. Maybe we'll go that way, but it might be more of that. I somewhat enjoy those more because I find them more rich, but I also do enjoy just sitting by and hearing people. So
my suggestion is to follow what interests you. And, I'll respond to that and speak about what interests me. So
I'll go with that, with the caveat that the tricky sweet spot is it's not just about me, at least right now. It is about what interests me, but also how does the container that you and I are in right now is the container of this Zoom call, of which it is enclosed within another subcontainer of this overall. But I think that being said, we'll go with it a bit. For me, what's kind of funny is I just had someone scheduled to come later, and it'll be the first Continnum person speaking, although she's an osteopath as well. And
Bonnie?
Yes, Bonnie.
Yeah, give her my love.
I will. But it's funny for me because I was just thinking this morning, I'm really excited to dive a little more into Continuum. And then that pops up here. It's just, I think the world is a really funny place if we get out of the way a bit. That said, I really am interested in what you were saying about resources being available and yet not necessarily being used by people or being found by people, which makes me kind of think of a more philosophical question of, and I forget the name of this school of philosophy. If somebody doesn't see that a resource is available, is the resource available?
Is that similar to if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it?
Well, no, well, yes, and it's more a bit about how we make meaning of the world. And so you and I have found various similar but different, but I'd say ultimately at the same, probably pretty similar ways of helping ourselves get out of ruts and holes and patterns, and also learning how to help other people in that. So we have some resources that clinically are working and helping and benefiting people. And my guess from what I'm hearing you from my own experience is, well, I just want to share that with the world because I was troubled and still am troubled, but less troubled, and got help. And why wouldn't we just want to make the world a better place? Yet, to some extent, they exist to us. They're within our belief system. But to the person on the street walking by my building right now who has no idea we're even in there and is stuck in a rut and doesn't know about Continuum or Hannah Somatics or Rolfing or any whatever name we want to talk about it, they don't exist. And there is no other possibility than what they're in. So the resource is buried underground and therefore not, and they don't even know that they could dig, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's why it's important to spread the word. See, Andrew, I think where that takes me is people, I have a belief about why we're on this earth. And, I acquired that belief after a almost 60-year process of exploration. And my belief is we're on this earth to evolve into our deepest, fullest nature. Okay? And that belief is not shared, obviously, by the majority of human beings in this world. Okay. For many, it's about survival. Okay. Mm-hmm. And, clearly we are, if we don't do something, if we don't destroy ourselves first, we are at the very close to our ability to end world hunger. For example, we have fewer wars now than at any time in the past, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And, we have the capacity. Then what? Why are we here? And, I believe that people like Dr Rolf, Emily Conrad, Tom Hanna, etc., Moshe Feldenkrais, have come to this earth to help humanity. It's a radical statement. But I believe they've come to earth to help humanity in that direction, towards the recognition of, who we really are. And where that takes me is to the nature of water. But I'll stop and see if there's anything you want to say before I ramble on about water and human nature.
Well, you're a Continuum person, so I would expect that, and I'm okay with that. Yeah, it's something about, and I'm not in disagreement. A lot of times I come off that way. It's more about refinement and what are we actually saying? Because I would agree that I think we're in agreement that one of the purpose is a word I'm not sure it's the right word, but I'll use it for now. Purposes of being here is evolution, deepest, fullest nature. But I would also say that the people just surviving, that is their deepest, fullest nature within the confines of the environment that they're living in. And so I don't want to take that away and say, well, they're not living their deepest, fullest nature, because if they're in a war zone or they're in a place where there's a famine, or they're in a really traumatic place, they are, I would say, doing quote unquote the best they can. They are the deepest, fullest nature possible at the time within the confines of that. And there could be other resources that come in that help them move one way or another. But I just, for me, there's something about that if we are evolving and the other people are in safety, you're not saying this, so I don't want to hear it as but there could be a sense of, well, we are better. And not that the person saying being deepest evolved would say that, but someone in a stuck place of safety sees that and says, what's having a shame spiral, guilt spiral coming down more. And the realization that both people are doing the deepest, fullest nature that they can at that time.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Good refinement.
Well, I think people it's interesting. I had a client today who is almost in a similar, she's waking up, we might say, or becoming more aware of things that have been limiting her. And her friends circle doesn't support her in the same way because they're of a slightly different cycle. And she can dialogue with me and have that refinement and say, great. And she asked me, said, well, where do you do it? And I said, well, I've pretty much alienated most of my friends because I don't find that a lot of people do want to be in that refinement. And yet, for me, I think that constant back and forth of both of us refining and acknowledging and or saying, well, I hear that and not, that is one of the things that does bring us to our deepest, fullest nature and our most fluid sense. So thank you for letting it be.
Yeah, again, I agree with you, and want to point out one thing. I don't believe that there are too many people who are deeply into that survival mode, who are trying to figure out how to get their medical needs paid for or to get enough food on the table. I doubt very much that they're listening to this podcast.
Yes.
I think of people who are listening and looking for podcasts and looking for information, have caught a glimpse of possibility and are looking for ways to, to live that.
Yeah. Yeah, I could go more down there, but I know that I can get stuck on anything, and so I want to. I'll say let's move because the thing with refinement is, and I think my perception is both you and I will enjoy it a lot, and then we will somewhat lose the container of people will just start checking out. Does it feel like moving into water? I love that. As I say that, because it's an audio talk, people won't see, but as I say that, you're drinking a glass of water. So does it feel like moving into water, and why that is the richest? Or is there another place of direction that is like, hey, this is what I actually want to share right now?
Well, let's start with Rolfing, Hellerwork, structural integration. It's what you do and what I've done for over 20 years. And in my personal life, I think I've had over 500 sessions since 1971, where I got my first 2 Rolfing sessions at Esalen. And, I think it's a very, very important modality that can make life so much more comfortable for so many people, especially as they get into their 50s, 60s, 70s. I continue to get sessions in my 80s. Now, Joseph Heller made one fundamental shift. You know, when Ida brought the work forward, she was very, very careful to not have it be associated with the airy fairy new age, so she kept it very much to the body, clear. Joseph came along and said, wait a minute, we're not working on bodies. We're working with people. And I think that was his fundamental contribution. Even though Hellerworkers will tell you that it's body work, it's movement, it's dialogue. Yeah, there's definitely some truth to that. But I think the fundamental shift was it's that person you're working with. So whenever a client came in, I'd always sit them down for 5 full minutes and find out what was going on in their life. What did they notice? And for example, one of the things that I noticed over 22 years is that people would make a lot of relationship changes in the course of doing the 10 series, or 11 if it's Hellerwork.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think I get worried when I hear people who think similar to me. Not really worried, but I enjoy it. But then there's a part of me that says, oh, are we in an echo chamber of sorts? Because what I'm hearing is there's a lot of things I've studied, and the common question asked by people when they come to see me is, well, what are you doing, or what are we doing, or what is it you do for work? And I more or less say, I work with people. It may be that I'm working physically on someone, but a lot of times, as you know, and as you've hit at, how are they living in the world? What's going on? How are they holding against the world? And there is this interplay, at least in my belief system, that you can't have a body without a mind, and vice versa. And so if you really want to help someone, you got to work the human. And that's what I'm hearing from you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So how is it? I'm already kind of trying to figure it out in my brain. I'll put it aside. How is it you came, what brought you to Hellerwork? What was Dawn's process? I mean, you mentioned a bit about being like having a lot of trauma and difficult and on the path to death. So what was it that was the catalyst or the shifter that brought things around and brought you to this?
Well, once I realized I was about 20 years old and realized that I needed a great deal of help. It became obvious from what I was getting myself into at that very tender age. And, that led me into psychotherapy. That led me into studying psychology and going to graduate school in clinical psychology. And while there, I came across the writings of Wilhelm Reich, who was an eminent disciple of Sigmund Freud and was projected to be Freud's successor. And he was developing psychoanalysis a lot when he came to the conclusion, as he put it, the character structure of the individual and the physical structure were functionally identical. meaning you could predict one from the other. And basically stated that in order to get real changes in the personality, you needed to address the body. And that, really piqued my interest. And then at about the same time, I came across an article by a writer named Sam Keene. Have you heard of him?
He was a Rolfer, correct?
I don't think so, but he wrote an article called Sing the Body Electric.
Okay.
And that was back in the early 70s. And, he talked about the profound changes he experienced, the pain, the whole thing. And I said, that's for me.
So that brought you into, because was Hannah's Somatics first for you? Is that what brought you to Hannah through that area?
No, that was much later. I got my master's degree, dropped out of graduate school before starting my dissertation, went to California, finally got a job at a place called the Center for the Healing Arts, which was one of the first holistic health centers in the country. And this was about 1976. I had already met and been friends with Joe Heller for about 4 years. I was getting sessions from him. And one day he told me he needed a secretary. Now, at that moment, I was on the staff of the Center for the Healing Arts. I had arrived. It was the place to be for a psychologist with my interests. And so, it was a dream come true, except I kind of got hit by a bolt of lightning in the middle of the night. Joseph was looking for a secretary, and that bolt of lightning told me to go take that job, to leave the paradise I was in and go tape up his pictures and make his appointments with my near PhD. And it was absolutely a ludicrous, irrational decision. It had, it wasn't a financial gain. There was no, I was planning to get trained as a Rolfer. Okay, that was in my mind. At the time, you had to be kind of a mesomorph, more of an athletic structure, and I didn't quite fit, so there was some question in my mind. But at any rate, I was planning to go in that direction, took the job with Joseph, and 2 months, 3 months later, he decided to start his own school. And there I was.
What was he? He just needed a secretary for at that point, his Rolfing practice?
Yeah, he was one busy Rolfer.
Okay.
One of the first in LA. There weren't that many Rolfers in LA in 1972, 3, 4. They started coming, but it was still, for a city that large, there were only maybe half a dozen Rolfers in those early years. So, yeah, he'd start at 7 a.m, finish at 7 p.m. Yeah.
No wonder he needed a secretary. I get that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And also, he was president of the Rolf Institute. So he had a lot on his plate.
Yeah, that's right. He was. And then I forgot about that. And so then a few months later, he decided to leave. Had he talked with you before, or was he at that point said, I'm gonna leave and do my own thing?
Nope. He got hit by a bolt of lightning, just like I did. Yep. And he was in a 6-week business consciousness school in Vermont called Birkeland Humanistic Business School. I was there. as his assistant, but also did a research project for that school. And he was supposed to have a project, and he had some ideas about a project, but none that included starting a school until somebody said to him, "Why don't you start your own school?" And he had that moment where it hit him. And ironically, Ida Rolf was one of the speakers at that school. And she shows up about a week after, and he sat down with her and showed her all his plans, how he would teach, what he would include. It was quite a moment.
Mm. So when he started, because my understanding is the way that I've always heard about Hellerwork is it's more or less Rolfing or SI with a little bit more talk. And please correct me on that. But with your back, was he asking for your background in terms of your psychology background? Did he have his own? What is it that brought that? How did it all sort of blossom and become what it is?
Yeah, good question, Andrew. It came out of how he did Rolfing. Mm-hmm. From day one, he had a lot of training. I mean, he did a lot of work with Werner Erhard, with Brew Joy, with the Los Angeles Gestalt Therapy Institute, studied, Alexander Lowen's bioenergetics. And from the very beginning, when someone was on his table, he had his own system of bringing to light the unconscious beliefs that limited the individual. It was, as a psychologist, I can tell you, it was something to behold. He just had a very natural, instinctual way. I called it the Socratic method of counseling. He would just put out these questions one after another until that person's stuck place would come to light and point out how that person was keeping himself or herself stuck in that place. So when he started a school, I was one of the people who said, look, you got to teach that. You got to find a way of teaching that. So, he brought psychology into our training. He also brought the work of a man named Brew Joy. He was well known in the 70s, mid 70s in Los Angeles. He was a medical doctor who got sick, couldn't find healing in the medical world, went to India on a spiritual quest. A year later, returned and began teaching living from the heart chakra and how to channel heart energy into your hands. And he taught the first week of the first 3 trainings. So there was that dimension that was brought in as well.
And is that all? You're not involved, I guess, in it, but is that all still a part of what Hellerwork is, or did it continue to evolve in various ways?
That's a hard question to answer because I'm not. It's been over 20 years that I haven't been involved very much. There was always this concept of attempting to bring unconditional love, attempting to be heart-focused in meeting and working with clients. So I'd say that that's continued, and that thread has run through the years.
So you helped start it, and then you were secretary at the point what was your path like? Did you end up becoming faculty of some sort, or?
Yeah, I was the first administrator
Mhm.
until my class. I was in the first class. When we graduated, I ended my position as administrator and began to focus solely on my practice.
Mhm.
After about 3 years, I began teaching some of the psychology in the training. And after a little longer, I teach a part of it. And, after about 10 years, I was directing my own trainings
Okay.
with the assistance of my wife and usually other partners.
And were those trainings Hellerwork trainings, or was it
Yeah.
another? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Gotcha. With the assistance of your wife, makes me wonder, is or was your wife a Hellerwork practitioner as well?
She got trained in one of my early trainings. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah. Always, generally, not always, a little bit jealous. Jealous isn't the right word, but admiring of couples who can work together in fields like this, because I think
Mm-hmm.
that it can be such a rich field for our own development, for a couple's development to be, for me, because this field, this path is so much a part of who I am. It would be a wonderful thing. It's not something I will ever see happening with my wife, who I love very much. It's just we're in different, very different, and we get our own growth from our differences. But when I meet people like yourself who've been able to be in that, I think that's there's a part that has some admiration for you. So I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you. I will say that for about 2 years or more, teaching together was
Oh yeah,
challenging.
yeah.
It brought some unexpected challenges, some rather intense fights.
Mm-hmm.
But over those first 2, 3 years, we worked it out and we still teach together. We teach Continnum now.
Hmm. Yeah, I would imagine there would be egos come in, ideas come in. That even though we think similar, we're going to think slightly different. Why did Don say that? I don't. That's not. But then over time, especially in spaces like this, which allow for safer dialogue and to be vulnerable in safeness, the disagreements can lead into, again, more refinement into a space of better support.
Mm-hmm.
It's lovely. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So in the story of Dawn, then, well, I guess there's a few ways to go. One is, what happened while you were with Hellerwork? How did it? What was the sort of trajectory? The other trajectory is Dawn's trajectory. So we've heard about two modalities, Hannah Somatics and Continnum, which haven't fit into the puzzle yet. Um, I don't know if one of those trajectories has more gravitas for you right now.
Uh, yeah, Continuum, certainly. Well, first, let me say that I was enchanted with structural integration.
Mm-hmm.
I was enchanted with Hellerwork, the work that I was doing. I'd look in the mirror sometimes while I was working, and the thought would cross my mind, and they're paying me for
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
The quality of human contact you can have with skilled, intentional touch. It's beautiful, and for 20 years, I moved to the Bay Area and I focused on building a Hellerwork practice, which I did. Took me about a year before it was really grounded. And, gradually some of those clients would stay on and become psychotherapy clients. So I always had a small psychotherapy practice along with the Hellerwork practice. I really loved it. It was just And then there's a whole other story about Mike having a heart attack. And from that moment, from the moment of that diagnosis, you can read my book to get the whole story. It is very interesting. But from the moment of that diagnosis, I did not get another single call for bodywork. Not one. They were all for psychotherapy. And I didn't do anything differently. I didn't change my advertising. Nothing, Andrew. Nothing. That's how it happened. And as soon as I was able to work again, my practice filled right back up, only it was 100% psychotherapy.
Well, I would imagine it was a body-centric, well, maybe not body-centric, body-aware psychotherapy, though, correct?
Oh, always is, yes.
Yeah, well, always is for you.
Yeah, for me.
Yeah. It's one of the things I have a few talk therapists who I work with. I'd love to work with more, both in the practice room, but actually as like referrals, because they're just that blending of both major aspects of being a human. I mean, mind and body is there's, to me, it's such a rich marriage of and so to be able to be doing both of those, and then to also, more or less, what I'm going to gather is to bring a lot of the principles of structural integration, or of Hellerwork in this case, into, we'll call it the psychotherapy, but it's really the Don's container of working with people, and having that, and noticing structural things that can be, I mean, I always find it interesting how some people we don't touch. We're in this more dialectic, inquiry-based process, and they get off and they feel better, and their body has changed. And you say, wow, I didn't even need to touch the tissue. We just needed to find that thing that's holding, that's gripping, that's resisting, kind of get into it, name it, and the body changes. I think it's pretty radical how that all happened for you. So, when and where does, was Continnum? How did Emily fall into your lap?
Well, I was in the Bay Area in 1983. I had heard about it when I lived in Los Angeles in the 70s, but I didn't seek it out. And in the 80s, I heard about it again in the Bay Area and took a workshop with Susan Harper, who was the only other person teaching Continnum at that time. And I swear I thought she was from another species, because, I'd never seen a human being move like that. The fluidity was just extraordinary. And I took three workshops, 2 with her, 1 with Emily, and then forgot about it. Went on to something else for about 10 years, living in Seattle. And my wife had heard that Susan was teaching a workshop up there, took it. I took the next one, and ever since, that was in 1995, 96. Ever since, we've been doing it. I taught several times with Emily. Became a Continnum teacher, and I'm still doing it.
Is it something that you also bring into? So most of your clients, or maybe all your clients now, or the work you do now, is psychotherapy, right?
Right.
Yeah. Does Continnum ever enter into the fold?
Absolutely, especially with clients who've taken one of my workshops, or any Continnum workshop, because, they know what I mean when I tell them to slowly enter into a location, let's say the center of the chest, and feel their way around the space, Yeah, it does.
Yeah, again, I think we're somewhat speaking to a similar brethren of sorts that my practices, I never know what was going to happen, and it's really a lot about. I never got to study with Emily, and I more or less found her work. Only I'd heard of her, I heard of Continnum for a while, and I was doing other dance and movement modalities. But I think I first trying to remember if it was five rhythms or ecstatic, one of those kind of found first. And I've always been pretty stubborn and pick sides. And so I say, okay, this is that other thing I'm not going to do because I'm doing five rhythms. And I think part of it's not to overwhelm myself, but part of it's also a bit of a stubbornness and like a patriot. This is my team, and so I just never foolishly never really went down the continuum rabbit hole. But later, as I started studying and learning more about it, it just makes so much sense.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah, you have Bonnie coming on, so I don't have to talk too much about it. Your listeners will get a very good representation from Bonnie. But Continuum, it's obviously a somatic path, and yet it has so much spiritual potential.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let me go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you please go ahead.
Okay. Let me throw something at you. See, one of the major contributions, in my opinion, that Tom Hanna made. Hanna was a philosopher by training, a professional, academic PhD philosopher, professor at the University of Florida. I mean, he was a real deal philosopher, and his philosophy took him to the body. Mm-hmm. And he made an observation that I think is profound. And that is that he says, look, the body is a third person thing. Right? It's the shoulder, the rib cage, name it. It's a third person thing. And we know a great deal about the body from that side, right? A great deal. He said it's also a first person, a subjective, an experience. That's what he called the soma, or the living body. If you were in this training, you said, I'm learning body work from Tom Hanna, he'd kick you in the butt, because he was adamant in bringing through this idea. And he said, we know nothing about that. We know so little about it. And I think that was a radical portal that he opened, but I don't think he walked too deeply down that path.
Well, I also don't think he opened it. Because he's a philosophy professor, but what he's talking about is Husserl's work. Husserl is the one who talked about Liebe and Körper, which is the German words, and my German's not great, but it's the German words for the lived body and what you're talking about. I actually think Hanna just recoined the terminology from Husserl and then later from Merleau-Ponty, who were preeminent. Well, Husserl wasn't a body therapist. Merleau-Ponty is, and I don't know if you're familiar with Maurice Merleau-Ponty's work.
Yeah, I've heard of him. Yes.
I mean, his work and his phenomenology of of the body, of his terminology, loosely translated English, is the flesh of the world. It's very inspiring for me. Hannah, just looking at the philosophy of it, saying, I think he just kind of took Husserl's basic theory of lived and whatnot, and then propagated it forth. But it's interesting. I never knew Hannah. I think he passed a while ago.
1990.
Yeah, I was 10, so I didn't know him. I was I was too depressed at that point to know stuff. But there's an interesting thing that I think, for me at least, and I've gotten arguments with colleagues about that. I read Hannah as a very rigid person. Like Emily, I read as this, like, I just read her and it's like my whole body becomes like amorphous. But Hannah, I read rigid. Not that he was, but it's difficult because for me, what he's talking about, like you're saying, he hasn't walked through it, and not better or worse. We need maybe the people before, but there's just something in that I can't fully put to words, but makes total sense.
Well, let me, I had the experience of having sessions with Tom and being in that fateful training where he died in a bizarre car accident after the fifth week. And see the point that where I was going with this, whoever originated those ideas of the living body, it's important. And one of the things that Emily has done is she brought a model of experiential anatomy. Mm-hmm. Right? And she called it the three anatomies: the cultural anatomy, the primordial anatomy, and the cosmic anatomy. And my understanding of the cultural anatomy is just pretty much what we think about when we think about anatomy. We can look at a movement and we can, define what muscles that, you're flexing and you're extending, etc. The primordial anatomy was the recognition that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. In other words, for those who may not understand that, our personal individual development goes through the development of the species. We start off as this little fish-like creature, and develop from there. And here's the point, and that in continuum, the potential to experience ourselves as other than human. That's the primordial anatomy. We can be undulating on the floor and begin to sense ourselves as a reptile. Mm-hmm. Now, I know this is pretty far out, but who else has brought forth an experiential anatomy? And the cosmic anatomy, refers to space. If you think about it, our bodies are primarily space. And we have, again, the ability to experience the dissolution, or at least the softening of the edges of that I, me, individualized self, separate self, and sense at least a sparkle of the connection that we have to each other, to nature, to the cosmos. She was a mystic.
Oh, yeah. And I'm hearing that. And for me, with my understanding of Rolfing, it's actually somewhat in the same, not as but part of the point of what we're doing is freeing our limitations to be more expansive in the world, which is another way of saying, how do we meet the world more? How do we take up space more, be more space more? Very different ways of doing it. And I actually think when you combine them in various ways and allow for various amalgamations of that neither is inherently perfect, but can have more maps. Like everything you're saying is what I'm generally trying to do with my clients and well, I'd like to say and myself, but I get a little too busy and forget to do it myself. But what I'm trying to do with my clients in the container that is allowed. Remember, I'm currently living in Boston, very different than Seattle and Pacific Northwest and Northern.
I'm in Salt Lake City now, very different from Boston and from Seattle.
I don't know much about Salt Lake City. I have my preconceptions that I've been told, but I'm not going to actually allow them to be because I've never experienced it. So I have ideas, but I really don't know. Would it be a more contained environment than, Northern California?
Contained. Not sure what you mean by contained. Less variety?
No, what I mean is one of the things that I learned by living in various parts of the world is how culture defines and allows people to live within space. And New England, coming out of Old England, it's still there's a few things. There's still a puritanical essence in the air, even though we're long gone with that. It's still in the ethos. We also are more, buildings are closer together somewhat here because it was one of the first places things got built up, and then slowly as you went west, to some extent, there was more space. But I find that, the East Coast and the West Coast stereotypically are entirely different in how the psyche can be. This is obviously a gross overstatement. There are people on the East Coast who can fit West Coast paradigms, and people on West Coast who fit East Coast paradigms. But there's a more rigid structure for the most part in Boston, in this area, for lots of reasons than there is in Seattle. I spent a lot of time up in Bellingham. I get to Bellingham and I'm like, this is great. I can take up space and be in space and allowed. And so I don't know enough about Utah. What I meant more by contained was what I'm aware of. There's a particular religion that has a predominant amount of people, and I think part of the government there, so that may provide a containment of how to take up space and live life within there, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, and it's especially palpable in the state of Utah. Salt Lake is, it's a much more spacious place than I would say any other county in the state of Utah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Having been through Utah a little bit, but not Salt Lake, palpable. There definitely was a palpable difference between Colorado, southern Utah, and then Nevada. It was palpable. It's interesting. But yeah, you're up in Salt Lake, and that's different. And I forgot how and why we got on cities. So yeah, well, with what we have, I'm really enjoying listening to you and hearing more about Dom, but also just more about the field, because there's so much overlap between a lot of these somatic practices that doesn't always get talked about. It gets talked about in terms of, I think, Thomas Hanna was studying with Ida, with motion photographs, and motion photographs and Ida were like frenemies. But there's a lot of people who were mixing in and out, and that isn't as talked about. And I'm fascinated by a lot of that. So to hear more about it and to get pieces filled in of this quilt that unifies all of us in these somatic practices
Mm.
is really, it's one of the things I really enjoy about this talk is that, and then sharing it with others, because there's just, I mean, there's going to be, but there's a lot of holes or things forgotten or things not allowed to be talked about. So I don't know what more you would want to talk about, and it doesn't have to be about that, but I'm just enjoying where we are going.
I think we've covered quite a lot of territory in this hour. One more thing I'd like to put out. I don't know how many of your listeners are practitioners of structural integration, Rolfers. But when I first moved to Salt Lake City about 12 years ago, I got put together a new website, or I had a website put together, and the person doing it did a lot of searches on what words got what hits. I don't know the language all that well. But what turned up was that Rolfing is a much better known word than structural integration by far. 12 years ago, by far. And my vision is that every reputable school of structural integration, and I think it's begun to happen with the Guild, but I think every school should use the term Rolfing. So it could be, for example, the Hellerwork School of Rolfing, the Rolf Institute, the Guild School of Rolfing, the Soma School of Rolfing. To take that word that's, with all the controls and criteria, it's like chiropractic. Everybody and his brother knows the word chiropractic. Everyone. And has for years.
Yeah, I mean, I pay a pretty heavy due every year just so I get to use it so that other people can't get to use it.
I know, but why not extend how many can use it so that, it gradually grows into the lexicon of the culture?
Well, my understanding, I mean, I'm not the person to necessarily talk about that, but my understanding is the Guild uses the Rolf method. So they can use her name and her method, but that part of the deal when my understanding, I could be slightly off here, is when the split happened was that the Rolf Institute, then the Rolf Institute, now Deary, got to keep the trademark, and so it becomes IP. And the reason, I mean, this is every few years this comes up in the community, but the way that I understand it, not that I necessarily agree, but again, being in that lineage, giving it away doesn't really help necessarily. I know the thought is it does, we all help each other, but I think that a lot of people say, listen, we own the trademark, and if we give that away, somebody will go see I live in Boston, there's a lot of KMI people, so someone will go see the KMI person who's doing Rolfing. But the thing is, what the Rolf Institute will also say is that they're not doing Rolfing, that it's something actually different than Rolfing. And so because it's different, we don't want McDonald's and Burger King are both selling fast food. McDonald's has I think they have a better name. I don't know if they have a good name. So some people want to go to McDonald's to get the Big Mac. And some people want a Big Mac at Burger King, but they can't. So Burger King has a Whopper, and I don't know, Wendy's has something else. And they're all fast food hamburgers, and we're just playing the game that we play for the special different ingredients. But also the counter side says, I don't know any two Rolfers who do the same thing.
Right, exactly. I think there's a much greater difference among practitioners than there is among schools that have the 10 session, that have the recipe that Ida developed. Okay. And again, I think it's for the greater good. I think it's for more and more people. I think it's for Rolfing to become a household word, like chiropractic. Chiropractic has all kinds of different modalities within it that don't even resemble each other, but the chiropractic profession is a well-established profession in the world. That's my argument.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I see sides for both that are beneficial, and I luckily don't have to make that decision and just get to be a part. And again, I actually started at a different school, but ended up at the Rolf Institute. I get to. It doesn't matter that much for me because I pay for the trademark, and while I recognize it can be, again, I think there's it comes a lot down to business, as does a lot of stuff in life. And I don't agree with a lot of it, but systems are in place, and it's hard to change them. So, but just know you're not alone. There's a lot of people who feel that way, though most of the people I meet who feel that way are the ones who don't have the power, who don't have the trademark. So I think that's a normative, and at some point, power struggles always shift. So it may happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Andrew,
on that note, on that note, no, I'm great talking with you, and I appreciate your time, and I'm glad for our connection that started, and we'll see where and how that all unravels.
Okay.
All right. Have a great day out there, Don.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to us at Touching into Presence. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. You can find out more about our guest today, Don St. John, at www.pathsofconnection.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate it if you'd leave a positive review of the podcast and subscribe to it through the platform of your choice. When you do this, it really helps other people find us, and we greatly appreciate your support. We look forward to hearing back from you and seeing you on our next conversation at Touching into Presence. Bye for now.